Welcome to Relax Story, a place where gentle stories help you leave behind the noise of the day and slowly drift into a peaceful sleep. Each soft, soothing narration is designed to relax your mind, release tension, and guide you to a deeper sense of calm within. If you enjoy the experience, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay with Relax Story every night, and feel free to leave a comment to share your thoughts or suggest a story you'd love to hear. Now close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let Relax Story guide you into a restful deep sleep. After the 23rd hour of the 21st century, when the pulse of life has withdrawn into blocks of artificial light, the edge of a great city opens like an unfinished region, where electric glow thins, then dissolves into natural darkness. The temperature falling to somewhere between 10 and 12 degrees, the air lightly cold and damp, a low mist clinging to the ground and blurring every outline, so that trees, stones, and narrow paths merge into one, the moist earth holding each faint vibration, allowing sound to travel farther than it should, farther than the limits man once believed he held. And in the distance, the city still gleams like a cluster of artificial stars. Yet here at the boundary, everything slows, darkens, and slips from control, as though this were no longer part of civilization, but the place where civilization has only just touched something older than itself. Within that darkness, eyes that need no light continue to observe. An infrared camera registers life by the heat it releases, cutting through mist, through night, data flowing back to a center where every signal is measured against what is known. And then a deviation appears, a large thermal mass moving slowly at the forest's edge, matching no known pattern. A drone is deployed, flying low, widening its field of vision, as though extending human senses into a region the naked eye can never reach. The images return in fragments, a heavy footfall spaced at unnatural intervals, a body muscled yet more compact, a sparse covering that holds warmth against the cold air, a large head where the jaw remains the seat of power. The creature moves with control, not reacting to the drone at once, as though the presence of technology is not unfamiliar, as though it has been here long enough to become part of the environment. Not an intruder, but something that has belonged to this place long before. Piece by piece, the data eliminates every familiar possibility. Not an elephant, not a bear, not any living species. The gap in understanding widens, until only one conclusion remains, unacceptable, yet undeniable. A creature that should have vanished 66 million years ago stands at the edge of electric light, a deviation in history. To understand why it exists, the timeline must retreat, not by thousands of years, but by tens of millions, to a moment when a single variable did not disappear, and from that point onward, everything turned. Some 66 million years ago, in the immediate aftermath of the Chicxulub impact in what is now the Yucatan Peninsula, the sky above North America ceased to be a sky at all, becoming instead a dense shroud of dust, ash, and fine drifting particles, so thick that sunlight could not pass through, and what had once been the cycle of day and night began to blur, stretching from months into years, even into thousands of years, as light faded into something like a distant memory, and temperature no longer held steady, plunging into bitter cold, then rising without warning, as though the planet itself were losing the rhythm it once knew. Forests burned fiercely in the first days, then died away, leaving behind cold grey lands where ash covered every dead trunk, every scorched layer of soil, every footprint not yet erased. Beneath the rivers, within shallow seas, the bodies of organisms drifted, gathered, settled, layering upon one another as though a new stratum of earth were forming before time itself. As photosynthesis collapsed, plants could no longer renew themselves. Vast herds of herbivorous dinosaurs, once the primary source of energy for the ecosystem, vanished with alarming speed, and with them, a food chain millions of years in the making fell apart. This was not the end of a single species. It was the unravelling of the entire foundation that had once sustained it. And yet within that space, which seemed already dead, life did not disappear entirely. It contracted, withdrew, folded into narrow regions like pockets of air within a sinking body. River basins that still held water became places where stranded fish and drifting carcasses gathered. Cold swamps preserved moisture and fragments of biomass not yet decayed. Coastlines and shallow waters collected what remained of marine life, while half-burned forests retained the final traces of vegetation. There, creatures with lower energy demands endured. Fish, turtles, and crocodiles persisted in silence amid the shifting environment. Small mammals burrowed deep beneath the ground, living on what fragments remained. Primitive birds pecked at seeds and small carcasses, and decomposing insects worked without pause, turning death into a secondary source of energy, accelerating the final cycle of an ecosystem already in collapse. These places were not refuges. They were the last transfer stations of energy, where everything that remained was compressed into confined space and stretched time. At the edges of these regions, a few individuals of Tyrannosaurus rex still remained, no longer apex predators as they once were, but creatures forced to adapt to a world without prey. Jaws that once tore flesh now became instruments for crushing bone, breaking the hardest remains to reach the marrow within, the last reserve of nourishment left in bodies long dried. An acute sense of smell allowed them to detect carrion from afar, tracing faint trails through the cold air, moving slowly, conserving each measure of energy, for every step now carried a cost. There were no more chases, no more hunting strategies, only a repeated act: search, approach, feed, then wait. Once, they had faced herds weighing many tons, overwhelming them with force. Now, survival depended on fragments of bone, what was left behind, what no other creature required. Natural selection in this period did not unfold gently. It swept through like a cold wind, removing each individual that could not adapt. Larger bodies, demanding greater energy, perished first. Those that moved too much, spent too much, vanished sooner. Those that remained dependent on active hunting found no food, and they too disappeared. What remained were individuals relatively smaller, less active, better able to endure hunger, inclined towards scavenging rather than pursuit. A principle emerged, not in words, but in the absence of what no longer existed. The creature that survives is not the strongest. The creature that survives is the one that consumes the least. Within that shifting picture, other organisms did more than endure. They reshaped the ground of survival itself. Small mammals did not compete directly, yet embodied a more efficient model: small, flexible, conserving. Aquatic life became one of the few stable food sources, for water environments changed more slowly, preserving fragments of the energy chain. Decomposing insects hastened the breakdown of carcasses, shortening the window in which food remained available, forcing all creatures into harsher competition for each rare opportunity. In that network, there was no center, no ruler remained. Every creature, no matter how large, became only a link in the process of decay. A being that once ruled an entire continent, whose steps shook the ground, once the summit of the food chain, now wandered through a world without prey, without purpose, without its former role. No more pursuit, no more thunderous roars, only slow, heavy footsteps and the scent of death threading through the cold air. Only a small group endured, small enough not to exhaust itself too quickly, resilient enough to withstand long stretches of emptiness. The direction of evolution began to shift, no longer toward greater size, but toward endurance, toward the ability to persist, to withstand, to adapt ever deeper to scarcity. From those that survived the ash, a new lineage quietly emerged, no longer wholly like its ancestors, as though a path had diverged, early, deeply, and beyond return. Between roughly 66 and 58 million years ago, across a North America just emerging from the shadow of the KP extinction, life began to return, but the earth did not reopen like a door into an old room. It remade itself according to a different order. The first layers of vegetation spread across bare ground. Then young forests slowly closed their canopies along river corridors, around lake margins, in damp lowlands where mist hung low over the cold earth. Mammals, once small creatures living at the margins of the dinosaur world, began to expand swiftly in number, in form, in size within spans so brief that, against the scale of planetary history, they resembled a single breath. Fossil records from Colorado suggest that only about 100,000 years after the catastrophe, both the diversity and body size of mammals had increased sharply, while terrestrial plants and animals reorganized through multiple phases of recovery. The world had returned to life, but it was no longer the old world. Any surviving individuals of Tyrannosaurus rex, if indeed a small branch endured across that fragile boundary, would no longer stride across the vast plains of the late Cretaceous, where herds of enormous herbivores once provided immense sustenance for an immense body. They entered a world denser, wetter, smaller, broken by recovering forests, river channels, water edges, marshes, brief clearings between trunks where prey no longer appeared as great masses of flesh moving in open ground, but flickered into view in fragments, in moments, swift, low, unpredictable. In such a world, what once defined power began to turn into burden, not the roar, not the bite, but the ratio between body and energy. In the first generations after the catastrophe, the descendants of Rex likely still bore a clear resemblance to their ancestors: the massive head, the crushing jaws, the hind limbs still holding the explosive strength of an ancient theropod lineage. But natural selection does not preserve symbols, it preserves fitness. The larger the individual, the more it required steady food, the harder it was to endure lean seasons in an ecosystem still piecing itself back together. More compact individuals consumed less, endured longer gaps between successful hunts, moved more easily through dense forest, along riverbanks, across shallow lakes, and approached smaller, more elusive prey with greater success. Over many generations, this pressure did not favour larger still, but just large enough for a bite to end the hunt, small enough that the body itself would not become its own biological trap. Such reduction was not foreign to the history of the tyrannosaur lineage. Before one branch of this family reached colossal size in the late Cretaceous, many distant ancestors had once been smaller, faster, more agile, living in the shadow of other great predators. In this hypothetical history, evolution does not invent anew. It reopens an old path beneath a new sky. The body grows less immense, the stride less heavy, the shadow cast upon the ground shorter. A monster begins to learn how to live as something more economical. As form changes, so too must the hunt, for no giant hunter of herds can persist forever in a world of small, swift, scattered targets, small and mid-sized mammals, early birds, reptiles, semi-aquatic creatures, large fish in rivers and lakes. These offered no grand feasts, but instead formed a dispersed web of sustenance, many small chances replacing a few great ones. The descendants of Rex gradually abandoned hunting dependent on open ground, turning instead to close ambush, making use of forest shadow, narrow paths, water's edge, the rustle in low brush, the moment a creature lowered its head to drink or crossed a stretch of mud. The bone-crushing jaws remained a vital inheritance, not only to kill, but to extract value from the harder remains, carcasses, bones, marrow energy left behind when a hunt was incomplete. The old weapon did not vanish, it was used with greater restraint. Yet a smaller body and a more precise strategy were not enough in the unstable Paleocene world, especially in cooler northern regions where temperature, moisture, and seasons fluctuated more sharply. Theropods already lay near evolutionary branches bearing feathers or feather-like structures, while skin evidence from the largest tyrannosaurids suggests that massive adults may have borne more scales, or only limited coverings in certain regions. For a smaller descendant lineage, living within cooler and shifting climates, a sparse insulating coat becomes a plausible adaptation, not a thick, radiant plumage, not an exaggerated vision, but a modest layer to retain heat, to reduce energy loss in cold mist, in long nights, in seasons of scarcity. A smaller body reduces need. A covering preserves what little is gained. Two small adjustments, compounded over time, may sustain an entire lineage. From there, what remains is time, thousands of generations passing beneath forests that slowly age, through rivers that shift their course, through seasons that come and withdraw, each generation a little less colossal, a little more enduring, a little less myth, a little more precision. The largest individuals fade from the future of the lineage, the more compact, more patient, more resilient those that endure hunger, exploit carrion, capture smaller but more elusive prey are preserved, like lines of biological script written in blood. Hunger, winter, and chance. To survive, the monster must become less like a monster. A post-extinction branch of tyrannosaurs begins to take shape, smaller, more agile, more enduring, suited to recovering forests, river margins, shallow lakes, and the shifting climate of early Paleocene North America. From here, the story is no longer of a few Rex clinging to survival after catastrophe, but of a lineage turning away from its own past. beneath those forests, at the same time, another force is rising swiftly: mammals. Between roughly 58 and 45 million years ago, as the late Paleocene slowly gave way to the early Eocene, North America was no longer a land hollowed by the echo of an ancient end. Warm forests began to close their canopies once more. Humid woodlands spread across lowlands, mist rising from lake edges and river plains and between young trunks, low shrubs, and sunlit clearings. A new world was assembling itself piece by piece. After the KP event, mammals were no longer creatures hiding in shadow. They grew more diverse, expanded more rapidly, entered a wider range of ecological niches. In some Colorado records, within just the first 100,000 years after extinction, their abundance surged, while maximum body sizes began to rise as an early signal of a coming age. By the Eocene, many mammalian groups became more specialized, occupying broader territories, while modern birds appeared more clearly in the fossil record, filling the ground, the low air, and the water's edge with motion. Yet that world did not wholly belong to mammals. Life was returning, but the throne of predation was not quietly handed over. This was no simple smen of rule. It was an age of overlapping shadows. In that time, mammals spread like water, seeping through soft earth into shrublands, forest edges, river plains, moist clearings where food was abundant but visibility widened. Ancient forms such as multituberculates, condylarths, and many others began to fill ecological roles once left vacant from gnawing, browsing, fruit-eating, ground foraging, to moving in small groups along green corridors. They bore fur, warm blood, faster reproductive cycles than many former giants, more flexible bodies, more adaptable behaviors capable of branching into many directions as new opportunities opened. Some lineages grew larger, heavier, more robust. Representatives like Coryphodon of the late Paleocene to early Eocene reveal that large herbivores had begun to reappear across North America and Eurasia, as though the Earth were testing once again the idea of heavy bodies slow, consuming, space-demanding. But this growth did not unfold in peace, at forest edges, along water margins. Beneath winds sliding through reeds and damp soil, Tyrannosaur descendants remained present often enough to turn every act of feeding into a calculation. They did not need to kill everything. They did not need to appear everywhere. A footprint left in mud, a sudden silence among waterfowl, a herd turning before seeing the body itself, these were enough. The pressure selected for vigilance, for bursts of speed, for swift retreat into cover, for coordinated group response, for memory of terrain. Mammals did not evolve only to feed better. They evolved to avoid being detected too soon. For the ancient predator, survival no longer meant repeating the glory of the late Cretaceous. The early descendants of Tyrannosaurus rex in this imagined history could not stand upon open plains as their ancestors once had. The forests had changed. The prey had changed. The climate and habitat had changed, and so too must strategy. With the inheritance of keen smell, an enlarged olfactory brain, and jaws built to end encounters at close range, they turned increasingly to ambush toward wind, toward mud, toward the dim light of dawn and dusk. They moved along river corridors, waited in low brush, chose where forest opened to wet grassland, where prey must cross exposed ground to reach water, where a moment's hesitation would become too late. They were fewer than the spreading herds of mammals, yet rarity did not diminish their ecological weight. At times, a single predator large enough, patient enough, unpredictable enough could cast a shadow over a region far wider than its physical presence. It was not always seen, but it was always near enough. Thus the evolutionary race did not unfold as a loud battle, but as two currents pressing silently against one another across millions of years. Among mammals, those that burrowed better left more generations. Those that heard more keenly, startled faster, warned one another more effectively survived more afternoons. Those whose limbs suited short bursts, or whose spatial memory guided them back to brush, burrows, slopes, and fallen trunks, carried their bloodlines further. Among the descendants of Rex, the impulsive lost advantage, while those that moved downwind, circled forest edges, allowed prey to step into disadvantage, hunted less often, but with greater precision. These became the surviving pattern. Large birds, other ancient predators, and competitors along water margins made the world more crowded still, forcing tyrannosaurs to rely not on size alone, but on timing, distance, wind, and silence. The ecosystem itself became a map of invisible risk, where paths, rest, feeding, breeding, and even hours of appearance bent under the possibility of an ancient jaw waiting at the edge of light. In such a world, what mattered was not which lineage triumphed at once. What mattered was that none could remain unchanged. Mammals did not enter a stage cleared for them. They stepped into a world where the shadow of dinosaurs still lay upon wet grass, still lingered behind low trees, still read the wind, still turned every meal in open ground into a test of nerve, muscle, and memory. The survival of Rex descendants did not require overturning the rise of mammals. It required only that it persist long enough to bend that path slightly in behaviour, slightly in body, slightly in mind until, over deep time, that slight difference became another history. A new race had begun between brain, speed, burrow, herd, and ancient teeth. From this point onward, the future of mammals would no longer mirror the true past, for the story was no longer only of tyrannosaur descendants learning to endure a post-apocalyptic world, but of the world itself learning how to live around them. Yet for that shadow to stretch across tens of millions of years more, the ancient predator would face a challenge colder, slower, and more relentless than any rival. The deepening turn of seasons, the coming of harsher cold. Between roughly 45 and 34 million years ago, as Earth moved through the latter stretch of the Middle and Late Eocene, the world no longer held on to the deep, enveloping warmth of the early Cenozoic. The global climate began to cool in layers, slow as an ocean losing its heat, quiet as the long exhale of a planet after an age of extremes. Across North America, Northern Asia, and the high latitudes of the Northern Hemisphere, the change did not arrive as a sudden catastrophe, but as longer winters, thinner forests, shorter spans of light, and months when food no longer lay spread across the ground as it once had. Near the boundary between the Eocene and the Oligocene, around 33.9 million years ago, the cooling quickened, bound to the expansion of Antarctic ice and vast shifts in vegetation belts, as though the living map of the planet were being drawn toward darker, drier, colder tones. in the cooler intervals of the Eocene, the Arctic was no longer only a realm of warm, broadleaf forests, but could bear dense, cold coniferous woods, more strongly marked by the seasons, as if the North itself were rehearsing for a world in which winter would no longer be the exception. For a surviving branch of Tyrannosaur in this imagined history, climate change was not merely a backdrop, but a quiet blade of selection. To hunt well was not enough, to bite hard was not enough, to run fast was not enough. To endure across tens of millions of years, it had to learn to hold its heat, to spend less energy, to live through the months when life pressed itself close to the ground. When the world was warm, strength could be an answer. When the days shortened, the forests cooled, and prey vanished with the seasons, that answer had to grow more subtle, more patient, more enduring. Its new habitat no longer resembled the humid heat of ancient lands, where the soil lay soft, the air thick with moisture, and vegetation rose like a green wall, but instead opened into the northern coniferous forests of North America, the cold woodland bands and river plains of Siberia, the dark edges of pine, valleys that froze with the seasons, and shallow snowfields where footprints appeared only to be erased by the wind. There, winter did not merely chill the air, but slowed the rhythm of life itself. Conifers held their green in silence. Moss and lichen spread across the forest floor. Moisture lay low against the earth, and the sense of decay, fur, cold mud, and thin snow mingled into an invisible map. In ecosystems ruled by season, herds of herbivores could not remain in one place. For young grass, tender leaves, winter shelter, and water shifted by the month, by the year. By the pulse of the climate, their bodies were forced to read like an ancient command. These migrations became the lifeblood of the North, a current of flesh and breath, determining when a predator might feed, where it might wait, which paths were worth following in the cold. The old, the young, the wounded, those that could not survive a frozen night, all turned winter into a harsh store of energy, not generous, but predictable. When life no longer stood still, the predator could no longer remain a king fixed upon a single territory. It had to follow the seasons. It had to follow scent. It had to follow the cold that slowed its prey. The body of the northern tyrannosaur could not remain as it had been, for cold did not test muscle alone, but every unit of energy in blood, in fat, in skin, in each heavy step through snow. Its theropod kin had shown the possibility of filamentous coverings, and a large form such as Uterannus left direct evidence of feather-like insulation, making heat retention a plausible trait in cold environments. Yet fossilized skin impressions of Tyrannosaurus rex and its close relatives suggested that the largest tyrannosaurids bore extensive scaly skin. In this lineage, then, the more fitting image was not that of a giant bird cloaked entirely in soft plumage, but of a creature with selective insulation, thicker across certain regions of the body, more pronounced in juveniles or northern populations, enough to hold warmth without erasing the heavy form of a great predator. Across generations, those that retained heat better endured longer. Those that stored fat before scarcity passed through winter more easily. Those that moved less without purpose spent fewer calories. Those that could follow scent, tracing herds, blood, or carrion beneath the cold haze, found more to eat when sight was veiled by sparse forest, shallow snow, and grey shadow. Its body became a walking reserve, a slow furnace, a great dark shape that wasted no motion. It no longer belonged to the humid heat of the past. It walked among pines, thin ice and white breath. Very little movement was unnecessary. But the body alone kept it from starvation and cold. It was strategy that made it a hunter of winter, as climates cooled. Populations less tolerant of cold declined first, pressed to the margins by months of scarcity, by herds abandoning old grounds, by the cost of hunting as though the world were still warm. Some northern populations, slightly smaller, more insulated, far more tolerant of hunger, no longer lived by long pursuits or relentless hunts. They followed the migrations of herbivores, moving in patient rhythm with the flow of life, like a heavy shadow slipping behind the herds along forest edges, river banks, valleys, and thin snow. They let the cold do its work first. An old animal slowed, a young one drifted from the group, a wounded body struggled in deep snow, a carcass failed to rise after a frozen night. Where plant productivity shifted with the seasons, prey moved in cycles. And that cycle granted advantage to a predator that could read movement instead of defending a fixed ground. Herds became living maps of resources, and winter carrion became the least costly meal in a world where each stride demanded heat and fat. Winter was no longer only an enemy, it became an unseen ally. Across thousands of generations, this adaptation did more than preserve a population in the cold. It shaped a new ecological form, a lineage of tyrannosaurs moulded by conifer forests, shallow snow, enclosed valleys, and long seasons of scarcity. The creature of ancient warmth, once imagined as a shadow of hot lands, had become a being capable of quiet endurance in the north, hunting less often but at the right moment, less ostentatious yet harder to erase from the ecosystem, thicker insulation, seasonal fat reserves, measured steps, patient scent, and the ability to wait had turned it into a kind of northern tea. Rex, no longer a pure symbol of ancient strength, but the result of a planet cooling in cycles. It survived not because winter was weaker than it. It survived because it had learned to hunt with winter. From that form, the pine forests, the northern coasts, and the cold ecological corridors of the future would not be places devoid of tyrannosaurs, but places where its presence would continue, slow, silent, unannounced, yet impossible to ignore. As climates continued to shift and forests withdrew, that lineage would have to change again, not only to walk through snow, but to enter expanding grasslands, where herds would become the new heartbeat of the world. From about 34 to 20 million years ago, from the early Oligocene into the early Miocene, across the wide lands of North America and Eurasia, the world began to breathe to a different rhythm. After the dense warmth of the Eocene, Earth grew colder, drier, slowly drawing back the closed forests that once covered much of the lowlands, leaving wider openings, broader plains, low shrubs, and young grasses spreading like a new skin across the planet's surface. The vast modern grasslands had not yet fully risen until the late Miocene, but even in this time, the first openings were large enough to change the laws of life. At the edges of remnant forests, along shallow river channels, in depressions where grasses grew tall, along migration corridors of hoofed animals, or within seasons when dust dimmed the horizon like a thin veil, a large predator could no longer vanish entirely as it had in deep forest, yet could still learn to read wind, ground, and the rhythm of prey to close the distance. As space opened, the old laws of the forest receded. In the forest, life had depended on shadow, on trunks, on leaves that masked the sound of movement. On the grassland, life came to depend on distance, vision, speed, and the ability to recognize danger before it drew near. Early horses, from smaller Eocene forms into Oligocene and Miocene branches, followed a path toward longer limbs, larger bodies, fewer toes, and eventually teeth suited to grass and mineral dust. Ancient camels, present in North America since around 40 million years ago, became a familiar part of terrestrial ecosystems. Early rhinoceroses and many other ungulates diversified as open environments made room for new ways of living. No longer scattered individuals beneath trees, prey stretched into lines, gathered into herds, moved through lowlands, followed river corridors, paused and shifted again, as though the grassland itself were a body migrating with the seasons. From this, the herd became a form of intelligence of the plains. One animal might run fast, but a herd that looked in the same direction, turned together, panicked in the same rhythm, became a living structure far harder to break. In that world, each lifted head was a watch point, each unusual motion a signal, each sudden turn able to ripple through the group like a wave across water. Survival no longer lay in the strength of a single body, but in the ability to merge into the movement of many, for one that lagged could be left behind, one that looked the wrong way could be cut off, one that reacted too late could become the single gap in a running wall. Yet this world of many eyes, many legs, many breaths opened a new path for a grassland branch of Tyrannosaurs. It was no longer the heavy shadow of dense forest, nor yet a predator that lived by large coordinated packs. Its body remained large, but no longer bore the excess of its late Cretaceous ancestors. Across millions of years, it had been pared down by the need to conserve energy, strong enough for a brief burst, enduring enough to move long along the edges of herds, cautious enough not to waste effort on futile pursuit. Its legs held power for the final moment. Its jaws held the role of ending. Its instinct did not lie in endless running across open ground, but in waiting for the open ground to create a fracture. It circled along the margins of the herd, where tall grass still masked part of its form, where dry channels lowered the horizon, where headwinds carried the scent of prey before its own scent was betrayed. It did not aim for the herd as a whole, for the herd was too large a mass, too many eyes, too many reactions. It chose a single animal, a young one that had not yet learned the signals of the group, an old one that faltered in the moment of turning, a wounded one that kept too far a distance, one that drifted from the flow of the herd. When the distance closed, the hunt collapsed into seconds, into the tearing of grass, into dust rising underfoot, into a short charge bearing the weight of tens of millions of years of evolution. Then the jaws closed. It ended quickly. From here, the grassland was no longer only a place where light stretched across fields and wind moved through wide land. It became a space where fear passed from one body to many, from one glance to an entire herd, from a small signal into an organized flight. Early horses and swift ungulates were driven toward greater coordination, for speed alone held value only when the herd understood danger together. Ancient camels embodied another strategy, moving farther, keeping wider distance, not remaining long in places of risk, early rhinoceroses, with their mass and defence, forced predators into stricter choice, for not every large body was worth the cost. On the plains, herbivores could not rely on legs alone. They depended on spacing, on the direction of heads, on the position of sentinels, on the near instant turning of a group when one part sensed danger at the edge of sight. So speed seemed like life, yet it was never all. In a space so wide that everything appeared visible, a single break from the herd, a moment of turning slower than the shared rhythm, a stride falling out of line, and the past would catch the present in its jaws. One mistake was enough. The grassland Rex did not rule through constant violence, did not turn each day into a long chase beneath the sun, but turned the open world into a harsh test of herd cohesion. Under that pressure, herbivores grew more unified, more vigilant, faster, more responsive to the chain reactions of their kind. The grassland did not only grow grass and bodies that could run, it grew a living system of warning, where fear itself was shaped into collective behaviour. Yet not all tyrannosaur descendants remained with wind, light, and open distance. Some would turn back toward darker, denser, quieter places, where fear did not come from a visible chase, but from the long silence between the trees. Roughly 20 to 10 million years ago, as the Miocene passed through its middle and leaned toward its later phase, the world did not merely open into vast grasslands beneath higher, drier, wind-swept skies, but quietly shaped new kinds of forests, divided by mountains, rain, valleys, temperature, and moisture, where broadleaf woods spread across low slopes. Temperate rainforests held dampness within thick layers of moss. Bamboo forests rose into walls of green nearly impossible to see through, and mountain-edge forests trailed down cold, dark, humid inclines, thick with fallen leaves and broken trunks. Within these spaces, light no longer reached the ground as it did on the plains, but shattered upon the canopy, lingered upon leaves, and dissolved into overlapping shadows, so that the distance between a creature drinking at a stream's edge and another standing motionless behind a thicket could shrink to only a few breaths. The law of predation shifted with it. Long-distance speed no longer wore the crown. Endurance no longer meant chasing herds beyond the horizon. In the forest, advantage belonged to the one who knew how to vanish, how to place its foot upon damp leaves without startling the woods, how to wait along animal trails, by watering places, beside fallen trunks, beneath narrow openings in the canopy, or at the foot of slopes where prey must slow before realizing it has stepped into the final stretch of its path. Some tyrannosaur descendants, for that reason, did not move further into the world of herds and open space. They turned back toward deeper shadow, toward a place where a large body could still endure, if it learned restraint. In such a place, a predator need not be as fast as the open field. It need only be in the right place, long enough until the forest itself begins to close every path on its behalf. The forest branch of T, Rex no longer retained the form of a giant shadow born for wide horizons. Across generations, selection leaned toward bodies smaller than those of the plains, more compact, lower, with weight drawn downward to turn among trunks, wet stones, exposed roots, and uneven, yielding ground. Their steps remained heavy, yet not wasteful, slow, yet controlled, strong enough for brief bursts, but no longer bound to long pursuits. Their coloration, in this imagined course of evolution, would have settled into the forest's muted palette, the brown of damp bark, the grey of dark soil, the blue-black of deep shadow, the yellow tones of decay, broken patches of light and dark like sunlight filtering through leaves. They were no longer symbols of overwhelming size across open grass. They became symbols of waiting. A creature capable of standing still so long that insects returned to crawl across the roots around it. Birds ceased their alarm. The stream resumed its quiet flow. Until only when prey stepped within the final distance did that entire mass of silence move. In the forest, ambush is not the laziness of hunting. It is hunting honed by terrain, by limited sight, by reaction compressed so tightly that life may be lost within a blink. When a great predator no longer needs to reveal itself from afar, every other creature in the forest must learn new layers of vigilance, not only to see, but to listen, to scent, to remember, and to pass signals through the dark. Wild boar and suid forms of the understory became typical prey, with sturdy bodies, short legs, snouts pressed into leaf litter as they foraged, always drawn into places the forest both nourished and concealed with danger. Deer and smaller ungulates at the forest's edge held themselves half in feeding, half in listening, for small clearings offered tender grass, yet turned escape uncertain, cut by fallen trunks or slick slopes. Small bears and omnivores learned to read scent as one reads an old map, avoiding places marked by deep tracks, clawed bark, remnants of kills, or the smell of flesh sunk into damp soil after an ambush. Ground-dwelling birds and forest floor species became both prey and warning, where they fell silent too quickly, where they shifted direction too abruptly, where the rustle of leaves ceased without cause. There the forest floor was no longer empty. For early primates, the pressure reached deeper into behavior. The Miocene marked a critical period for primates and ape-like forms as forests, edges, openings, and terrain shifted constantly, forcing them to judge space through multiple senses at once. A ground-based ambush predator raised the value of branches, of height, of alarm calls, of group vigilance, of memory of trees that could be climbed swiftly, of rock clefts that offered passage, of paths not to be taken at the same hour twice. Survival was no longer merely running faster. Survival meant knowing where not to descend. From there, the forest began to change not by sound, but by its absence all species learned to listen to silence. The forest branch of tea. Rex did not need frequent appearances to shape a living community. It needed only to exist at key ecological nodes, the stream's edge where animals must bow to drink, the trails worn by many feet, the clearings where fallen trees opened green feeding grounds, the slope where balance faltered for a moment and the forest rewrote its own map. Paths shifted. Feeding hours moved earlier or later. Alarm calls grew shorter, sharper, quicker to travel through leaves. A place once shaded became a place to avoid. A stream once calm became a place to watch before stepping down. A trail once convenient became abandoned, overgrown. This was the landscape of fear in the forest, drawn not by roars, not by display, but by small decisions repeated across thousands of days. In the forest, what is most frightening is not always sound. Sometimes it is silence that lingers too long, the sense that the trees are holding their breath. the feeling that something has already seen the prey before the prey knows where it stands. As a result, primates and small mammals became more bound to the canopy, more wary of the ground, more reliant on social signals, spatial memory, and the ability to read the faintest signs of their surroundings. The forest branch of T. Rex was no longer merely a survivor across time, but an ecological force shaped by its habitat, a hunting shadow that became pressure, boundary, and unseen order within the modern forest. And from here, a larger question began to unfold: if it could live in grasslands, forests, cold regions, and swamps. Then what, in truth, would a modern T. Rex be in this new world? A lion, a bear, a tiger, or a crocodile? If a descendant of Rex truly stepped into the near-modern world, what would it be within the web of life? A lion of the plains, a tiger of the deep forest, a bear of the cold, or a crocodile at the water's edge? The answer does not lie in its form, not in its heavy skull, its long tail, its two-legged gait, or the ancient shadow still carried in its body, but in the role it takes within the landscape. Around 10 to 5 million years ago, as tyrannosaur descendants stabilized across habitats from open grasslands to dense forests, swamps, cold mountains, migration corridors, and the margins where life must gather, they ceased to be a single kind of predator. They became many things at once. In ecology, an apex predator is not defined by strength alone, but by a position nearly free of natural enemies, by its ability to exert pressure upon the layers below, by the way its presence alters other lives before the hunt even begins. To understand it, one must look at function. It presses upon herds, it ambushes, it scavenges, it controls the narrow places through which all must pass. On the plains, where wind moves across long seas of grass and herds flow like currents across the land, the Rex descendant comes closest to the lion in the pressure it places upon herd life. Like an apex predator of open space, it selects the weak, the old, the young, or the isolated, but more than that. It compels the herd to reorganize itself around the possibility of attack. Yet it is not a lion in the familiar sense. It does not require a large pride to coordinate from many directions. Its authority is quieter, heavier, more restrained, standing low along the edge of terrain, reading the wind, waiting for a fracture in formation, then closing in with a brief surge that turns hesitation into an end. When such a presence returns again and again to the same edge of grassland, the herd does not merely run differently, it stands differently, drinks at different hours, holds different spacing, places its sentinels in new positions. A shadow repeated long enough becomes law. It need not kill often, it need only be there. In the forest, that role turns quieter still, nearer to the tiger, yet deeper in ecological weight, beneath thick layers of leaves, where light falls in fragments upon damp ground. The T. Rex descendant abandons long pursuit and becomes a presence hidden along trails at water's edge, within narrow openings beneath the canopy, where prey must pass because the forest offers little choice. It comes close, waits close, strikes close. A forest individual need not appear daily to rule its range. Sometimes a deep track in mud, a scent mark upon bark, a half-eaten carcass beside a path is enough to shift the rhythm of life around it. Deer change their routes. Small animals alter their feeding hours. Primates grow wary earlier upon high branches. Ground birds abandon stretches of forest floor once thought harmless. In such a forest, food is never only food, a path never only a path. For every choice carries a quiet question: is this place safe? In cold regions, in mountains, or where scarcity stretches long across seasons, it approaches another function, nearer to the bear in opportunism and energy use. When large prey is not constant, when snow, ice, frost, or drought slows the rhythm of life, a carcass may hold value equal to a successful hunt. In such places, the T, Rex descendant hunts when chance allows, scavenges when the scent of blood leads, displaces smaller predators, or breaks open remains others cannot fully use. Its massive jaws become not only weapons, but tools, keys to unlock energy sealed within bone, hide, tendon, and frozen flesh. A carcass lying in a valley ceases to belong to quiet decay. It becomes a contested point, a dangerous table, a temporary centre where ecological order is rewritten. Who approaches, who is driven away, who is left with scraps all shift beneath the steps of the largest presence there. At swamps and river edges, where water slows movement, narrows escape, and forces prey to lower its head for a moment, the function turns again, this time toward the crocodile. It need not resemble a crocodile to fulfill the same role. It may stand at reed margins, along muddy banks, at crossings herds must use, turning the water's edge into a narrow gate of fate. Water cannot be avoided. All living bodies must come to it. When a large predator is present there often enough, herds shift their drinking sites, their hours, their routes, gathering in tighter or moving farther in search of safety. A small change at the riverbank spreads outward to grasslands, migration paths, resting grounds, even the way the young are protected. The water's edge becomes a map of caution. Taken together, these fragments do not form a copy of lion, tiger, bear, or crocodile. They form a composite of functions: an apex predator, an opportunistic scavenger, a moving weight placed upon the weak points of the landscape. More than that, it becomes an architect of fear, not by building nests, carving rivers, or raising dams, but by forcing all other life to move around it. A modern T, Rex does not merely kill a single prey within a valley. It causes water to be drunk elsewhere, grass to be grazed elsewhere, paths to be abandoned, feeding hours to shift, smaller creatures to live within longer, more exhausting detours. Its power does not lie only in its jaws. It lies in the fact that the landscape itself must learn not to cross its path. And from there, a greater question begins to open if such a pressure were to cast its shadow long enough across forests, plains, river edges, and migration corridors. How would primates and beyond them, the ancestors of humans, evolve beneath that shadow? From roughly 7 to 3 million years ago, as the late Miocene slowly yielded to the Pliocene, Africa was not an endless sweep of open grassland stretching to the horizon, but a mosaic world where scattered woodland, brush, ribbons of riverbank trees, grassy clearings, cliff bases, broad shadows, and natural shelters interlocked like pieces of a living map of survival. It was within that shift and space that the first bipedal hominins began to appear, and later, forms of Australopithecus. Living between about 4.4 and 1.4 million years ago, walked along those fragile boundaries, belonging neither wholly to the forest nor yet masters of the grasslands. Walking on two legs opened new possibilities, hands freed. Sight carried farther, the body moving in ways it had never moved before. Yet in this imagined world, where a modern branch of T, Rex still endured along the edges of forest and savanna, every one of those advantages stood beneath a greater pressure than any familiar predator. The moment our ancestors stepped away from the safer canopy was no longer a simple expansion. It became a slow wager, staked on each morning, each journey, each crossing of open ground. Australopithecus, or hominins like them in the early Pliocene, did not enter such a world as conquerors. They were small, their brains still modest beside the later Homo, their tools too crude to make them dangerous beings, their bodies upright yet still dependent on trees, on stone, on riverbanks, on structures that could shield them. A great trunk was not merely shade. A cliff face was not merely terrain. A riverbank was not merely water. Each became an anchor point in a map of fear. Places where a small troop of primates could watch, could hide, could withdraw before it was too late. A modern T. Rex need not take them as its chief prey to alter their fate. Its mere presence at the edge of tall grass, where light broke against trunks, or beside a descent to water marked by the tracks of herbivores, was enough to make every foraging journey heavier, slower, more deliberate. It was no longer a beast that appeared only in moments of terror. It became the unseen climate of behavior. From there, every open stretch of grass took on another meaning. Space was no longer something to pass through, but something to read like a question. When human ancestors stepped out from denser cover, they no longer reckoned only with hyena, leopard, lion, or the hunters that might lie hidden in brush. They reckoned with a creature that could see above the grass, could cross distances that their small bodies needed many breaths to traverse. Open ground would be crossed more swiftly, more cautiously, with clearer roles, one moving ahead, one bearing food, one keeping the young, one turning back to watch. Those groups that survived best were likely those that kept near cliff faces, near great trees, near sheltering caves, near riverbanks with paths of escape, near ridges that allowed them to see farther and vanish more quickly. Gathering roots and fruit, scavenging carcasses, seeking water, crossing a belt of tall grass, all might demand more bodies, more eyes, more memory of where had once been safe and where had once held the signs of death. In such a world, to live in groups was not merely a social advantage, it was a second skin of survival. Under that pressure, walking on two legs may have taken on a deeper meaning. It did not only free the hands, did not only help the body move across a changing land, did not only open the way to carry food or young, it raised the eyes above the grass, lifted the gaze beyond the low brush, and with it lifted the fate of a small primate a few spans higher toward the horizon. Those few spans might be the difference between seeing a strange motion and seeing nothing at all. Those few seconds might mark the boundary between a warning call and silence. Selection would bear not only upon the legs, but upon spatial memory, upon the sense of retreat, upon the sharing of watch, upon brief signals passed between bodies, upon the fleeting coordination of a group feeding in ground too open to trust. In time, tools, fire, and stronger shelters would no longer seem the quiet fruits of a mind unfolding in peace, but responses sharpened by darkness, by hunger, by the rustle of distant grass. Perhaps such pressure hastened intelligence and cooperation, for those who could see together, remember together, fear together, and act together would endure longer. Or perhaps it constrained expansion, holding hominin populations within scattered pockets of safety, where evolution did not burst outward, but drew inward around places with stone, with trees, with escape. From here, the story is no longer only of hunter and prey. It becomes the story of a small mind forced to grow in the presence of something vast, of a frail body learning to live by distance, by memory, by bonds, by the faintest signs upon the ground and in the wind. Humanity would not evolve in a world of predators that could be gradually driven off, avoided, or anticipated through familiar experience. It would evolve in a world where a towering shadow might move through the grass, appear at the river's edge, stand against the last light, and turn every open space into a trial. Intelligence might flower more swiftly under such weight. It might also linger too long before becoming civilization. The fate of humankind in this altered history may not begin with dominion, but with a far humbler need to sleep through the night, beside a first boundary raised against the dark, not of stone, not of metal, but of fire. From about 2 million to 500,000 years ago, in the later phases of Homo erectus and their close kin, the night remained a realm far larger than human imagination, not only because darkness concealed grass, stone, tree, and horizon, but because within that darkness, every creature with teeth, with claws, with sharper scent and quieter habits of the hunt, drew nearer than humans could ever know, at the mouth of a cave, at the edge of forest, upon the open plains of Africa and Eurasia. A group of early humans might pass the day beneath the sun, gathering food, tracing water, avoiding ground too exposed, choosing a resting place by a cliff or an open patch that could be watched in many directions. Yet when the sun sank, all those slight advantages narrowed, for the human eye was not made to master the night, the human body not swift enough to escape every ambush, and sleep, which life required, rendered the group into silent bodies within a world that was never silent. In true history, fire brought light, warmth, cooked food, and hours of wakefulness beyond dusk. But in this other history, where beyond familiar predators there lingered a modern descendant of tea, Rex at the forest's edge, greater than any fear hominins had learned to name, fire took on a deeper meaning. It did not only allow humans to see, it allowed them to draw a boundary. From the moment humans no longer merely encountered fire as an accident of lightning, of burning branches, of grass that flared and faded, but began to keep embers alive through the night, the entire structure of darkness changed, slowly, yet profoundly. A cave with a narrow mouth grew more precious. An open ground beside rock with wide sight became more memorable. A stopping place along a path of movement was no longer merely where the body lay down before dawn, but where a small core of light could be tended, where dry branches were gathered, where ash was shielded from wind, where the old, the young, the wounded, and the weary were drawn closest to the centre, beyond, where trees merged into a dark curtain, where the scent of damp earth mingled with the scent of beasts, where old prey paths crossed ancient corridors of the hunt, a modern tea. Rex need not step into the light to shape human life. Its presence alone, its tracks pressed into mud after rain. The crack of a young trunk from the shadow's edge were enough that fire was no longer a convenience. It became the heart of survival. Around that centre, the human night began to take on order, not an order written in law, not an order carved in stone, but a silent geometry of bodies, the weak lying nearer the warmth, the young held within brighter light, the strong set along the outer ring, those who woke late seated closer to embers, the entrance placed beneath the watch of flame, and the ground before the cave, once no more than darkness among darkness, becoming a space that could be seen, defended, and called one's own. Light did not erase danger, it merely pushed it back a few steps. Yet in evolution, a few steps may be enough for a child to live through the night, for a wound to mend, for a group to remember which place was safer, which season held more fuel, which sound was wind, which was small prey, which too heavy to ignore. The keeper of the fire was therefore no longer one who sat beside embers for ease. It was the keeper of the most fragile boundary humanity had ever known. From that small ring of light, society too drew closer, as slowly as ash holds heat beneath a thin grey veil. Fire softened food, lengthened evening, freed the hands after darkness fell, but more than that, it created a place toward which many bodies could turn, could remember, could learn, could pass on the signs of survival. A cry repeated, a track traced by hand upon the ground. A crude telling of where not to pass endured longer than a single life. When within the light lay warmth, food, bodies, and memory, and beyond it lay forest, mist, the scent of old blood, and teeth yet untamed. Humans began to understand something that would follow them long after survival did not lie only in muscle, nor in sharpened stone, nor in the speed of flight, but in the ability to sit close, to watch for one another, to share what had been seen, and to make community a second skin. Thus the first fire did not only cook flesh, it drew a new line between humanity and the dark, between the circle of light that might be held for one more night and the vast world that was not yet theirs. From that line would rise division of roles, shared memory, telling, ritual, the habit of guarding the weak, and the first thought that an inside might be made within an outside full of teeth. In a world where a modern tea, Rex endured, civilization may not begin with brick, with walls, with gates, or with roads of stone. It may begin with a small ring of fire, trembling in the night wind, bright enough to hold distant eyes at bay a while longer, warm enough to draw fragile bodies close, enduring enough to teach that darkness need not claim all things. From there, as food must be kept, as animals must be guarded, as sleep must find a stronger shelter than flame, the first dwellings would cease to be mere stopping places. They would begin to become villages. Between 12,000 and 8,000 years ago, in lands that lay warmer and lower, where rivers brought their silt and withdrew with the turning seasons, humans began to linger longer at the water's edge, beside fertile mud flats, across stretches of earth where wheat, barley, millet, beans, or rice could take root, depending on the valley, depending on the climate, from Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent to the Nile, from the Indus Basin to the distant Yellow River in the east. The footsteps that once followed herds, followed ripening fruit, followed the memory of grass and rain, now began to return to the same place, season after season, circling low huts, small granaries, and herds of goats, sheep, pigs, and cattle kept close to water and close to the human hand. It was one of the gentlest shifts in all of history, for a seed pressed into soil is a promise made to the future. Yet in a world where the descendants of Rex still lingered beyond the edge of darkness, that promise had scent, had warmth, had sound, had a rhythm repeating clear enough for a great predator to learn. When humans moved, they could not easily be fixed to a single point. When they sowed, built stores, and kept animals near, they did more than make food. They left a trace that endured through the night. From that moment on, the first villages were no longer merely places to escape sun and rain, to cook and to sleep, but began to resemble defensive diagrams drawn in mud, wood, stone, habit, and the memory of nights marked by loss. The riverbank remained the most favourable ground for fields. The fields still opened outward toward cultivation. The livestock pens still had to lie near for care. Yet the closer one stood to life. The closer one stood to danger, for the smell of dung, of blood, of damp straw, of stored grain, and the warmth of gathered animals could gather like an unseen flame in the dark. In the earlier settled communities, humans had already learned to raise walls, to hold water, to protect stores, and to shape shared space thousands of years before the Common Era. In this other current of history, that instinct would no longer be a gradual choice of a growing society, but an almost immediate necessity. Granaries were drawn deeper toward the village's heart. Like the pulse of the coming season, livestock pens were pulled away from the outer dark, placed behind the first line of enclosure. Shallow ditches, trenches, wooden stakes, earthen embankments, and raised watch points appeared sooner. Not because humans dreamed of cities, but because they needed to survive one more night. Beyond those crude rings of protection, the modern T, Rex did not need to appear often to rule the village imagination. It needed only to be large enough to break a weak stretch of fence, heavy enough to leave deep impressions along the edge of fields, keen enough to follow the scent of penned animals, of bodies cast away not far enough, of blood in the mud, of waste at the village's edge, of a young creature strayed in the night. It did not always hunt. It waited for the right conditions. A moonless night, a rotting barrier, a pen set too near the grass, a weary herdsman, a moment when the fire burned low and animals stirred in uneasy sleep. That ability, the power to come without needing to come, was enough to change how humans arranged their homes, their stores, their pens, placing children and the weak deeper within tighter rings of protection. From then on, settlement was no longer simply staying. Settlement became the organization of fragility. By day, the village belonged to agriculture, to hands that sowed, guided water, cut stalks, spread grain beneath the sun, drove herds along familiar paths, repaired roofs, packed earth, bound stakes, and counted stores laid out to dry. By night, that same place changed its laws. The fields became open ground hard to control. The pens became points to guard. The granaries became things that must not be lost. Children could not wander as they might in a gentler world, and the edge of the village became a taut boundary between the breath of humans and the breath of beasts. The herdsman stood on the front line between possession and danger. The night watch inherited the ancient role of the firekeeper, yet no longer tending a small flame for a wandering group, but guarding the existence of a fixed community. Stakes had to stand thicker. Earth had to be packed firmer. Gates had to narrow. Entrances had to be easier to seal. Vantage points had to rise higher. Living space drew inward toward what could be defended, as if a young civilization were folding into itself before daring to unfold. From that point forward, agriculture was no longer only the story of seeds cast into earth and rising beneath the sun. It became the story of seeds kept from the claws of night, of livestock shielded from what their own scent summoned, of human sleep placed behind fences, behind fire, behind packed earth, behind eyes that remained open when the village fell silent. In this world, the first villages were not merely farming communities. They were the earliest fortresses of survival, where humans learned that to live better, one must first live longer, and as populations grew, as granaries filled, as herds multiplied, the fear in the night grew with them, and the circle of protection had to thicken once more into walls, into gates, into ditches, into the first cities that turned their faces toward the dark. Between 8,000 and 4,000 years ago, as agricultural villages expanded across the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, along the Nile Valley in Egypt, within the ancient river basins of China, and in the imagined regions of Central America where forests, mountains, and terraced fields began to hold people in place through the seasons, settlement was no longer a handful of dwellings gathered by water, but a growing mass of life, with granaries, livestock pens, hearths, markets, rituals, the sound of people rising before dawn and the calls of animals at sunset. In real history, early urbanization was tied to surplus food, organized labor, trade, authority, and cities enclosed by walls over dependent villages. In this world, all of that still unfolds. Yet beneath that prosperity lies another meaning, quieter, colder, for the more people gathered, the more grain stored, the more animals confined, the more organic waste, blood, dung, hide, bone, and carcasses accumulated in one place. The more the city became a powerful ecological signal, like a flame lit in the darkness of the plain. That signal did not call only stray dogs, carrion birds, insects, or smaller predators. It could also call a modern descendant of T. Rex, larger than any familiar human fear, keen enough to detect the scent of flesh from afar, patient enough to follow the routes of livestock caravans, strong enough to turn the carelessness of a young city into catastrophe. A village might rely on fire, fences, shouted warnings, and watchful eyes along the fields. When habitation became a city, fear had to be laid into the ground, into stone, into the very way streets bent around the inhabited core. Thus the urban space took on the shape of a body that could defend itself, with outer walls like thickened skin, gates like mouths that could close, moats and channels like voids that forced whatever came from outside to slow before touching what lay within. Watchtowers rose to see beyond rooftops. Narrow streets curved to hinder the movement of large creatures. Granaries were placed deep near the center of control, where food was not merely wealth, but the heartbeat of the city in lean seasons, while refuse grounds, carcass handling, and livestock pens were pushed into controlled zones, reinforced and closely guarded, for their scent could not be ignored. City walls were not only to repel human enemies. In this other history, they also stood against a massive body that might crash into weak structures, tear through low barriers, and carry panic through unplanned openings. Gates had to rise higher, stand stronger, close by fixed hours. Moats had to deepen, widen enough to turn speed into disadvantage. Streets could not allow a great creature to rush straight into the city's core and turn back as though passing through an open valley. Each mud brick, each layer of stone, each cleared space before a gate became part of a defensive thought, as if the city were not built merely to dwell within, but to extend one more safe night. Yet walls and moats cannot keep watch alone. When fear becomes constant, society must change its form, for a crowded city cannot survive on instinct as a small village might. Builders no longer merely raised homes, they shaped the idea of safety into matter, measuring thickness, raising height, repairing cracks after rain and after impacts beyond the gates. Wall guards held the line between inside and out, between named firelight and the shapeless dark. Skilled hunters, rapid response groups, those who could read tracks in mud, drag marks along riverbanks, the scent of fresh carcasses on the wind, began to escort caravans, track large predators, and contain intrusions before panic reached granaries and dwellings. Record keepers emerged as the organised memory of the city, marking the seasons when predators drew closer, the patterns of their movement, the proper hours to close the gates, the places where carcasses must not be discarded. The ways to signal when great tracks appeared near grazing grounds. Authority, therefore, grew more concentrated, not only from trade or ritual, but because defense demanded a shared command, a shared schedule, a shared law. The closing of gates became law. The disposal of waste became law. The placement of livestock became law. The response to great tracks became law. A city was no longer simply a place where humans lived beside one another. It became a mechanism that held the darkness outside for one more night. In that world, the first cities were not only the result of full granaries, refined craft, and distant exchange routes. They were a collective declaration that humans would no longer sleep exposed beneath the claws of nature, that the small ring of fire once held at a cave's mouth had expanded into rings of earth, of stone, of law, of vigilance, of memory passed from season to season. The early state, organised military force, urban governance, and shared rules did not grow solely from surplus, but from the need to protect that surplus from being dragged away in the night. Civilization, in this current of history, was not born only from the power to accumulate, it was born from the need to defend. And when cities had walls, granaries, gates, moats, and those who stood watch, fear did not vanish. It merely stepped off the village edge and onto the map of kingdoms, where territories widened, armies marched, provisions moved across open land, and war itself began to take on a different shape in the age of Rex. Roughly 4,000 to 1,000 years ago, as early kingdoms and the first empires began to stretch across river plains, forest frontiers, trade routes, and narrow corridors of land that forced armies to pass through. War did not carry only spears, chariots, banners, and the marching rhythm of infantry. It carried provisions, livestock, grain, leather, timber for encampments, the wounded, the dead, waste, mud clinging beneath wheels, the smoke of field kitchens, and the scent of blood sinking into the soil after each clash. An ancient army, seen from afar, resembled a vast creature crawling over the earth, feeding, excreting, leaving behind traces that could not be concealed. In true history, logistics had already been the condition for survival in any campaign, for armies depended on what they could gather, what they could carry, what they stored, the depots that sustained them, and the long roads tying the seat of power to the frontier. In a world where Rex still walked in the present age, that entire mass of logistics was not merely a target for the enemy, it was an ecological signal. Where livestock sagged with exhaustion, where the wounded lay upon litters, where the carcasses of horses or draft cattle were abandoned after a halt, where raw flesh, broken bone, dried blood, and hastily dug graves marked the ground, such places did not summon only flies, stray dogs, or vultures. They could summon something larger, more patient, moving slowly beyond the reach of light, indifferent to the banner raised above a camp, unmoved by which king claimed the land. The battlefield did not attract only opposing armies, it drew the waiting force of nature. Even before battle, armies had to live as communities passing through hunting ground. A king or a general could not ask only which road was shorter, which bridge more secure, which river crossing more forgiving. They had to ask which forest edge lay too near, which reeds concealed the line of sight, which way the scent of livestock would drift when night fell. A camp was no longer a place of simple rest, but a temporary city that must defend itself against two kinds of enemies, men with strategy in the distance, and darkness with teeth just beyond the circle of fire. Ditches were cut deeper, stakes were set thicker, gates were kept narrow. Watchmen stood above the ground, peering through thin veils of smoke, while keepers of the flame fed embers through the night, not only for warmth, but to draw a fragile boundary between order and instinct. A modern Rex did not need to charge into the heart of a camp to alter the outcome of war. A single appearance at the edge of firelight, one draft animal dragged from a supply line, one long night filled with sound beyond the palisade, was enough to keep soldiers awake, to send horses into panic, to slow the formation by a breath at dawn, to leave it more weary, more brittle at the first call of horns. It belonged to no side, and for that reason, it was dangerous in a colder way. Thus, the supply line became the true battlefield. Convoys of grain, salt, water, tools, bandages, spare weapons, and herds of animals moved more slowly than fighting forces, carried stronger scent, and were more easily separated from protection when crossing riverbanks, forest edges, or roads turned to mire after rain. In such a world, an army that won the clash yet lost its draft cattle, burned its granaries, abandoned its dead, buried its wounded too shallow, or left waste trailing behind could turn itself into prey. After the battle, when metal fell silent, when the living counted the dead, when the earth was still warm from footsteps and wet with blood, the field might call Rex faster than reinforcements. Victory was not enough. One had to survive what came after. When men came to understand this pattern, war did what it had always done. It made use of everything. Some armies learned to drag the carcasses of livestock toward the outer lines of the enemy, to let the scent of blood settle near opposing camps, to leave behind fields of the dead as a calamity placed with intent. They could not command Rex, nor tame its instinct, but they could read the path of scent, the pull of hunger, the certainty that a creature of opportunity would move toward the place where death lay thickest. And so the battlefield gained a variable that wore no armour, took no orders, knew no loyalty, yet could force walls to rise higher, towers to be built sooner, bows and spears to be held in greater regard, fortified camps to grow more intricate, and the handling of the dead to be governed with stricter discipline than any right of honour. War was no longer only man against man. It was man against man while nature stood at the edge of the field, silent, patient, waiting until the scent of blood grew dense enough to step in and take its share. A state that governed its logistics, its fires, its dead, its livestock, its barriers, its retreat. And the fear of night would hold advantage over armies that knew only how to win by force of collision. Power did not lie only in the moment of defeating an enemy, but in the ability to control what rose after the enemy fell. Across centuries, that fear returned along borders, within camps, beside rivers, in the uneasy sleep of soldiers, until it passed beyond tactics, beyond the maps of marching routes, beyond the sound of wheels on dry earth. It entered myth, ritual, and symbol. From prehistory into the ancient age, through layers of time laid upon one another like ash over old ground, the modern T-Rex was no longer merely a creature that moved along the forest edge, beyond the hunting village, where grasslands dimmed at dusk or paths descended toward water. A creature immense and real, appearing close enough at times to silence a group of people, yet rare enough that none could fully understand it, would never be regarded as an ordinary animal. From early on, humans had to learn to read the behaviour of animals to survive, to read tracks in mud, the shifting flight of birds, the unnatural stillness of the forest, the scent of wind, the empty spaces where prey vanished. In such a world, Rex was too vast to be dismissed, too dangerous to be forgotten, too mysterious not to be wrapped in fear, reverence, and imagination. It stepped from biology into memory, and memory, carried across generations, began to seek its own form. On cave walls, on stones near shelter, on dry wood, on clay still soft before fire hardened it, the shapes of great two-legged forms began to appear, traces of a real obsession. They might not be precise in anatomy, need not follow every joint, every proportion of neck, every curve of skull, yet a standing body, a great head, a tail drawn long behind, a row of teeth enlarged in charcoal and red earth, was enough for a community to know this was not deer, not wild cattle, not horse, not any creature of the ordinary hunt. Prehistoric art often preserved the animals that bore deep meaning for life, for food, for death, for migration, for the imagination of man. And in this imagined history, the presence of T-Rex in cave paintings would be nearly inevitable. From track in the forest to image on stone lay only a single beat of memory. Yet image was only the first skin of culture. When a community began to name what it feared, that fear no longer belonged only to the eye, the muscle, the instinct to flee. It entered sound, story, the low-burning nights before the cave mouth, where elders slowed their speech when speaking of forbidden ground, where children learned the name of a creature before ever seeing it. In one place, it might be called the Eater of the Moon, for its roar was heard on nights of pale light. Elsewhere, it became the god of teeth, keeper of the boundary between village and forest. In a distant valley, It was the shadow of the grassland, unseen by day yet enough to turn travellers from a wide stretch of land. For some tribes, it was death walking on two legs. For certain ancient courts, the slaying of such a creature could become a sign of mandate, a feat belonging not only to strength, but to the right to stand between humanity and chaos. As these stories passed through generations, they ceased to be mere tales. They became ways of living. Children were taught not to speak loudly when crossing Old Forest, not out of courtesy, but because sound might draw nearer what should not be called. Lullabies carried within them quiet warnings of dangerous seasons. Proverbs reminded adults not to cross open ground when the light was low. Seasonal cycles mark the migrations of great beasts, the breeding times of predators, the seasons when old paths lay empty, signs that forbade passage, rituals of departure, oaths before the hunt, branches bound at the forest edge, bones hung at the entrance of dwellings, all turned fear into social order. There were places not to enter, sounds not to make, seasons to endure, names to be spoken only in low voice. Thus Rex no longer lived only in forest, valley, misted grassland, or behind the dark line of trees at the foot of mountains. It lived in lullabies, in drawings, in ritual, in names, in unspoken laws, in the dreams of children who had never seen those teeth, yet feared the darkness beneath the trees. Fear, repeated long enough, no longer rested in the heart or the limbs. It entered language, memory, symbol, religion, the way men divided the world between the safe and the forbidden. A creature could begin as a force of biology and become a presence of the mind. It became culture. And by then, the modern Rex existed not only in the material world, it lived in how humans spoke of death, how they imagined power, how they revered nature, how they taught one another to survive. That deep and lingering layer of memory would ensure that later societies did not merely fear it, but were drawn to it as well. And one day, another force would draw near, not born of myth or ritual, but of powder, shot, and industry. And the question that remained was whether the thunder of man would be enough to end the dominion of teeth. From around the year 1500 to 1900 of the Common Era, when gunpowder had left its distant eastern origins to become the foundation of handheld firearms, artillery, and forms of violence that could be cast across distance, human history began to step into a very different threshold of power, one where the hand no longer needed to touch the flesh of its prey, where muscle no longer faced muscle directly, where courage was no longer measured by standing within reach of the jaws of a creature many times larger than oneself. Across Europe, the Americas, Africa, Siberia, the colonies, and the newly opened frontiers, the sound of gunfire didn't only reshape war between human beings, but in this imagined world, it also reshaped the ancient relationship between humanity and a modern lineage of Rex that had endured through tens of millions of years. Before that, distance had been its shield. Deep forests protected it, high mountains protected it, darkness and fear protected it. But from the moment humans could compress harm into a bullet, a gun, a cannon's barrel, technology no longer merely helped them avoid Rex. It began to grant them the power to impose upon it. Yet gunfire never travels alone, for behind every report comes the sound of axes cutting into trees, the grinding of wheels across damp earth, the hammering of stakes into fence lines, the iron wheels of railways stretching across lands once beyond the familiar map of civilization, colonization, land clearing, farms, railroads, military outposts, royal hunting grounds, and newly carved roads drove humanity deeper into places where modern today. Rex had once maintained its safe distance, from deep forests to mountain ranges, from frozen regions to the edges of farmland, from river plains to valleys where only the tracks of great beasts once pressed into cold mud. Vast landscapes, once continuous like a single immense hide draped across continents, began to be cut into fragments by fences, rail lines, settlements, and corridors of extraction slicing through former hunting territories. For large species, this fragmentation was not merely the loss of land, but the loss of pathways. The loss of migration seasons, the loss of encounters between populations, the loss of those quiet connections that once allowed blood, scent, and instinct to flow through space. Sumped Rex populations were driven into high mountains, deep forests, cold zones, or remote frontier terrain. Some vanished locally under the twin pressures of hunting and habitat loss. Others persisted like ghosts along the edges of maps, rarer, farther away, yet each appearance heavy as a memory that refused to leave the world. When a great creature is pushed into the last open spaces of the wild, humans do not only fear it as their ancestors once did in the dark, around fires, behind wooden fences, or at the edge of grasslands. They begin to want to touch that symbol, to measure it, to bring it down, to hang proof that what once stood above them in the food chain can now be subdued by metal, powder, and reputation. Royal hunting parties, nobles, professional hunters, wealthy landowners, and seekers of renown turned the hunt for Rex into a new ritual of power, where the death of a colossal creature was not only safety for a region, but an invisible medal upon the name of the one who fired the shot. From this point, the relationship between humans and Rex slowly slipped out of the realm of pure survival and into that of symbol, of status, of the desire to prove that civilization not only knows how to build houses, grow crops, lay roads, but can also turn the barrel of a gun upon the very fear that once followed it across the open wild. For the first time in tens of millions of years, the Rex was no longer an absolute, overwhelming force. It remained fearsome, but it had become a target. Even so, the balance of power did not tilt in a single moment, for the world remained broader than administrative maps, deeper than railway lines, colder than the will to conquer, and more complex than any firearm. In regions already opened, divided, and lit by villages and garrisons, Rex was forced into greater secrecy, greater avoidance, retreating farther from expansion routes where the scent of smoke, iron, and livestock had replaced the smell of old forests. Yet in forests still unbroken, mountain ranges still difficult to cross, cold regions where winter still raised its own barrier, the creature could still hold its place as an apex predator, still move through spaces vast enough for a massive body to matter, still sustain sparse but enduring populations, hidden routes of movement, territories that humans entered only with caution. For the first time in 66 million years, Rex encountered a species that could kill it without coming near, without teeth, without claws. Needing only distance, gunpowder, and a cold will to conquer, the balance began to tilt toward humanity. Not completely, for the terrain remained vast, for some populations still lay hidden, for the fear this creature had planted in human memory had not vanished with the first gunshot. From this unfinished turning, the modern world would have to learn an art more difficult than victory, not merely how to kill T-Rex, but how to build cities, open roads, light the frontiers, while beyond the edge of light there still remained a great presence that breathes, that waits, that reminds humanity that its new power has never erased the past. In the 20th and 21st centuries, cities spread across the surface of the earth like ordered halos of light, with highways stretching through valleys, suburbs rising at the edge of forests, vast farms extending beside darkened growth, national parks marked off by maps, signs, guard posts, and conservation laws, while the remaining ecological corridors lay quietly beside residential zones that seemed entirely claimed by modern life. Yet at the very moment humans believed they had learned to measure, divide, illuminate, and control space, the boundary between civilization and wilderness grew thinner than ever. As populations increased, habitats shrank, roads cut through animal ranges, and lands once separate became bound together by concrete, engines, and light. In this world, beyond the fence there is not merely a large animal straying from deep forest, but a modern descendant of T-Rex, rarer, more elusive, yet still vast enough to force every notion of safety to be rewritten in terms of technology, law, and infrastructure. The city, therefore, cannot be only concrete, glass, electricity, and comfort. It must be a vigilant body stretching from its urban core to the edge of darkness, where suburban residents, rangers, rapid response teams, biological tracking specialists, local authorities, and park management all exist within a network of constant observation. At the margins of habitation, thermal cameras see through the night. Along electric fences, motion sensors register an unusual tremor in the grass. Along highways cutting through wild regions, biological monitoring stations gather traces, movement data, and the long silences between signals. Near industrial livestock enclosures, carcass disposal sites, restricted park zones, and emergency alert nodes, ancient fear does not vanish. It merely changes form, from a cry in the dark into coordinates, heat maps, warnings on screens, and response protocols activated before danger steps into the light. Cameras once used to observe elusive wildlife become the night eyes of the city, while drones move low along forest edges, tracing the dark corridors of trees, checking anomalous signals at the water's edge, confirming a movement larger than expected, then guiding response teams without forcing human presence too soon into the dark. Yet surveillance is only the outer skin of defense. When a creature large enough to interpret the scent of livestock, poorly handled carcasses, or a weakened gait as an invitation from afar, modern life must learn another language, the language of guiding fences, wildlife crossings, barriers, reinforced enclosures, gate sensors, scheduled inspections, and routes designed not only for vehicles, but to reduce the chance of collision between humans and what still moves beyond the safe map. On large farms, livestock enclosures are no longer light structures standing quietly through the night, but layered defences, for the modern T-Rex does not need to appear often to shape the habits of an entire region. It lives alone or in small populations, in deep forest, mountain terrain, park edges, or ecological corridors rarely crossed by people. It moves more often where light begins to fade, where vegetation obscures sight lines, where water dulls sound, where night carries fewer traces of human activity. It may not understand the city as humans do, yet it is practical enough to learn where prey is easiest to reach, which fences are less maintained, when patrols thin, and thus livestock carcasses must be removed quickly, lest the scent of decay become a signal drawing the past back toward barns, fields, and service roads. Within national parks, certain restricted zones are no longer mere conservation lines on paper, but true territories of a predator that mass tourism must not turn into spectacle. Schools in forest-edge towns teach children calm rules. In place of panic instinct, do not run into open ground. Do not approach fences at night. Do not travel alone into restricted areas. Do not treat biological alerts as background noise. Warning systems function much like those for storms or wildfires, detecting traces, tracking paths, temporarily locking down risk zones, guiding residents indoors, rerouting traffic, delaying a bus, closing a school gate, halting a walking trail before an incident takes clear form. Rangers and response teams become the wardens of the modern frontier, no longer holding spears upon village walls, yet still performing the same ancient task, reading the signs of nature before nature crosses the threshold. The edge of the city in this world is therefore not merely where concrete meets vegetation. It is where civilization encounters the Cretaceous in a quieter form, where electric lights spill across fences, thermal cameras watch the tree line, drones hover above patrol routes, and beyond that ring of light, an ancient creature may still stand motionless long enough to remind humanity that progress does not always mean leaving fear behind. Sometimes it means learning to measure it more precisely. Humans live more modern lives, more organized, more technically secure, yet never fully free from the primal vigilance that once drove them to build fires, raise villages, erect walls, post guards, and listen to the dark. From there, the greatest question of the modern age begins to emerge in the cold glow of monitoring screens, whether a species that once forced civilization to grow at the edge of danger should now be preserved as a living legacy, or controlled until it remains only a memory. In the modern world, the question of Rex no longer rests quietly behind warning fences at the edge of national parks, in the wail of sirens from buffer zone farms, or on the cold screens of satellite monitoring centres, where small points of light drift slowly across the night map like fragments of a past that still breathes. It is no longer confined to ecological laboratories either, where blood samples, tissue samples, hormone data, genetic sequences, and tracking images lie side by side like pieces of a creature both impossibly ancient and unmistakably modern. It has entered international conferences, rescue stations, biological crisis rooms, and long drawn-out meetings between scientists, authorities, farmers, lawyers, conservationists, and the communities living along the fragile edges of habitat. For when a species can kill livestock, threaten human life, paralyze a region's economy, and at the same time stand as a living thread of evolution stretching from the age of dinosaurs into the present, every decision surrounding it ceases to be a simple matter of protection or elimination. It becomes a layered equation ecology laid upon economics, economics upon politics, politics upon ethics, and ethics upon the very real fear of those who must live in its shadow. When a species is both dangerous and rare, society no longer divides into those who fear it and those who do not. It fractures into layers of reasoning, each one convincing when standing alone. The ecologist sees in the modern T. Rex an apex predator, a force at the summit of the food chain, a pressure capable of regulating prey, shaping migration routes, altering feeding hours, revealing invisible maps of caution across grasslands, forests, wetlands, and cold mountains. To them, it is not merely a danger walking on two legs, but a rare component of natural order, a vast shadow reminding other species that no territory is ever wholly theirs. The farmer and herder, however, sees a nearer, heavier truth, one that smells of blood and repair bills livestock dragged from night enclosures, rising costs of defence with each passing season, electric fences that must be maintained, stronger pens that must be raised higher, patrol teams that must travel farther, children in buffer zones who must learn risk maps before they ever learn the names of the rivers near their homes. Governments stand between these layers of vision. Tasked with preserving public safety without reducing conservation to empty slogans, protecting habitat without abandoning livelihoods, answering to the public after every incident without allowing a single moment of panic to decide the fate of an entire species. And the public itself wavers in its own way, fearful at the sight of tracks near a village, entranced when watching it in documentaries, outraged when lives are lost, yet falling silent before the thought that on this planet there still exists a creature bearing the shape of an age that vanished 66 million years ago. When all sides are right in their own way, society is forced to do something profoundly modern, to turn fear and reverence into systems of management. And so the modern T. Rex enters a web of satellites, tracking collars, biological sensors, and real-time data. Mature individuals are monitored as they pass through ecological corridors, as they leave core conservation zones, as they approach farms, as they repeat a route often enough for it to become a marked risk on the map. Ecological corridors are opened like silent roads between fragmented populations, not only to preserve genetic continuity, but to guide movement away from vulnerable human settlements. Buffer zones are redrawn, warning stations multiplied, rapid response teams trained, livestock facilities reinforced. Laboratories continue their work on behaviour, physiology, reproduction, genetics, and the species' broader ecological impact. Yet after every attack, the same question returns. Like an old fracture opening again in the ground, should that individual be put down? Should it be relocated? Or must communities accept a measured level of risk to preserve what cannot be replaced? Data allows humanity to see more clearly. It does not lighten the burden. The more maps, signals, and numbers there are, the less the question fades. It merely changes its form from where it is to what should be done about it. At its deepest level, the modern T. Rex forces civilization to face a quiet and difficult question. If humanity is powerful enough to eliminate a threat, does that power alone make the act just? Conservation cannot simply mean preserving a species because it is rare, nor can it deny the fear of families living at the edge of buffer zones, of those who have lost their livestock, of towns that must close their roads after a single night marked by fresh tracks. Coexistence does not mean romanticizing danger. It means searching for a more balanced boundary between human life livelihood, ecosystems, and the right of a species that did not choose to be born into our age, yet remains here as a living witness to another history. In this way, Rex becomes a moral mirror for modern humanity. Are we capable of protecting what once terrified us most? Or will every word about natural balance dissolve the moment the cost becomes immediate, personal, bearing a name, a face? A broken gate in the night. A species that once ruled the earth, that once forced early humans to tend their fires longer, build higher walls, dig deeper trenches, and pass down more cautious stories about the darkness beyond the village edge, now stands before a new power, the power to be allowed by humans to continue existing. The story thus leaves instinct behind and enters the realm of ethics, leaving the question of how to live alongside it for a far more difficult one: whether humanity has the right to erase something that has already survived an apocalypse. In that moment, the meaning of dominance is no longer merely the ability to conquer, control, or destroy. Perhaps the greatest power does not lie in the act of killing, it lies in knowing when not to kill, and from there, the final question emerges more clearly than ever. Perhaps what made humanity the dominant species was not only intelligence or tools, but also the simple fact that, in the true history of Earth, some enemies too vast did not remain. Seen from a great distance, no longer bound to a single year, an era, or a clear line etched into ancient stone, this entire speculative history resembles a branching river flowing from a small yet immense biological divergence, a lineage of Rex that never vanished. From the darkness following the catastrophe 66 million years ago, across open grasslands, closed canopy forests, cold wetlands, ancient villages pressed behind fences, walled cities, modern borders, and the edges of today's urban sprawl, that continued existence is not merely the survival of a predator, it is a sustained pressure. It forces prey to alter their paths, compels mammals to change their rhythms of life, makes hominins linger longer in the shadows of trees, demands greater caution from agriculture, higher and thicker and more enclosed architecture, presses collective psychology to carry an ancient memory of something that can step out from the edge of light. In real history, humanity evolved through shifting climates, changing habitats, upright posture, freed hands, adaptive behavior, gradually unfolding into agriculture, settlement, and cities. In this history, that same path still appears, but the ground beneath it is no longer as quiet. And so the final question is no longer whether Rex could survive. It is whether, if it does, humanity could still grow in the same way. There is one possibility in which humanity still reaches dominance, but later, more cautiously, at a higher cost with every step forward. The first fields would not be chosen only for fertile soil and nearby water, but for wide visibility, clear escape routes, and controllable lines of watch. Early villages would not only be places of cultivation, exchange, child rearing, and seed keeping, but defensive bodies, closing in upon themselves as dusk falls. Fire, fences, trenches, watchtowers, alarm calls, narrow entrances, granaries set deep within. None of these would remain mere details at the margins of civilization. They would become its spine. Cities could still rise, labor could still specialize, power could still organize into laws and institutions, but every stone laid would carry a different memory, a memory that says beyond the gates lies a world not yet tamed. Humanity would still win, but its victory would never sleep deeply. There is also another possibility, darker and wider, in which humanity never escapes safe refuges long enough to weave its history into a vast network. If the pressure from the descendants of T. Rex remains persistent, widespread, present across the transitional zones between forest, grassland, river, and farmland, then the corridors that once allowed movement, exchange, expansion, and connection may instead become barriers. A forest would no longer be only timber and shade. A grassland would no longer be open ground. A river would no longer be only water, fish, and passage. All could become borders of fear, where caravans slow, where children must be held closer, where goods cannot travel far, where ideas cannot spread quickly. In such a world, history would not unfold as a web stretching across the planet, but as scattered pockets of civilization, glowing briefly, then contracting, resilient yet isolated, intelligent yet divided. Surviving but never reaching the scale required to become a global world. What is lost would not only be safety, it would be the size of the future itself. Yet there is also a more paradoxical path, for pressure does not only crush, it sharpens. A super predator lingering too long at the edge of life might drive human intelligence towards something tenser, more collective, more vigilant. Living in groups would no longer be a soft advantage, but a condition of survival, memory of terrain, wind direction, tracks, the scent of carcasses, the sudden silence of birds, the stillness before a rustle in the brush. All could become knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Hands would not only wield tools to cut, strike, dig, or cook. They would build walls, hold torches, tie ropes, mark warnings, seal gates at nightfall. Language would not only name food, kin, and sky, it would name danger. Along this path, fire, village, city, law, roles, and signals would not simply be inventions for a better life, but for life to continue at all. Yet a mind forged in the shadow of a predator would carry a darker depth beyond the light. Something larger, older, stronger remains, and civilization is only a thin layer laid across the surface of fear. Perhaps what allowed humanity to dominate the earth was not only intelligence, hands, language, or cooperation. Perhaps it was also the timely absence of certain enemies too large, too persistent, too ancient for a young primate species to overcome with ease. In that light, Rex ceases to be merely an animal within a speculative history, and becomes a symbol of a larger question: is civilization truly inevitable? Or does it arise only when the world is finally safe enough for it to grow? Perhaps what defines humanity is not only what it possesses, but also what it was fortunate enough not to face for too long. And in the end, the image returns, close and immediate, a modern night at the edge of a city, electric light thinning across wet pavement, cold mist drifting past a fence, a camera staring into the darkness beyond its reach, and from that darkness, a slow, heavy, unhurried footstep, as though history had never truly ended. On a modern night within this imagined present, at the edge of a city where distant rows of light still burn like a low constellation upon the earth, an electric fence stands silent between the residential outskirts and the dark forest, more fragile than it appears. For beyond those strands of metal lies a region where artificial light no longer fully reaches, where a thin mist drifts among the trunks, where a drone glides quietly across the sky, where night cameras sweep slowly over bark, brush, and open ground, then come to rest upon a large heat form standing motionless at the boundary between light and shadow. The lights remain, the surveillance systems remain, the warnings remain. Data continues to stream across screens as though civilization could measure all that approaches. Yet in this moment, technology is not the center of the scene. It is only a thin layer of brightness stretched between humanity and a world far older than itself. Beyond the fence, the modern T-Rex does not need to charge, does not need to hunt, does not need to roar to prove that it exists. It simply stands there, heavy, silent, almost unmoving, like a living marker joining the present to a depth of time once thought sealed away. The drone passes overhead without breaking the stillness. The cameras hold its shape in a pale, cold spectrum of heat. The city still glows in the distance, small and persistent, like a declaration written in the electricity, and the creature stands within the drifting mist, not like something returned from the past, but like something that never truly left. There is no chase, no shattered fence, no victory declared, and no lesson spoken aloud. Only two ages sharing a single moment of quiet on one side, concrete, electricity, data, warning signals, and the desire for control, on the other, flesh, teeth, darkness, instinct, and deep time. T-Rex does not need to rule in numbers to alter the meaning of the world. It needs only to remain, to remind that the Earth has never truly belonged to humanity, but has always been a place where humans learn to live better than most other species, learn to draw boundaries, learn to watch those boundaries, learn to negotiate with the wild that still breathes just beyond the light. If, at the edge of a city, such a creature still exists, then houses may be built differently, children may be taught differently, the stories told before sleep may carry another shadow, and civilization itself may no longer be imagined as a throne set above nature, but as a flame kept carefully alive against the night wind. After all the walls, the fires, the cities, the weapons, the satellites, and the warning screens, humanity remains only a species living beside an Earth far older than itself. There is no roar at the end, only mist, thin light, dark forest, and then a heavy footstep beyond the edge of brightness, like the final echo of a history that never truly disappeared. A great shadow remains,